there can be a temperature difference of 13 to 17 degrees in one city from one neighborhood to another because of concrete and black asphalt and no trees. And, when you call them a leafy suburb, we call them that for a reason, because they're wealthy and well canopied and cool. And trees lower your utility bill, they clean the water, they store carbon, they cool the air. I mean, they're just superheroes.
I'm your host, Adam Met, and today we're chatting with Kathy Baughman McLeod, the Senior Vice President and Director of the Adrienne Arsht-Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. After graduating from Florida State University, Kathy worked in several government and nonprofit organizations built to protect Florida's natural resources. Through that work, she was able to witness the ecology that is threatened by climate change. In 2007, she became the Deputy Chief of Staff to Florida's Chief Financial Officer, where she helped to create the first U.S. state treasury portfolio that accounted for climate risks. Today, as the Senior Vice President of the Arsht-Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center, Kathy is educating people on how to stay resilient during the climate crisis. We talk about her experience in Florida's climate-related disasters, how climate insurance can rescue individuals, and the community-led efforts that her organization is funding around the country. A quick reminder that we're planting a tree for every person who subscribes to this podcast, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. And without further ado, here is Kathy Baughman McLeod on Planet Reimagined. Kathy, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm really excited to talk to you about so many different topics. And if you are ready, we will just dive right in.
I'm ready.
Excellent.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Adam.
Of course. So you lived so much of your early academic and work life in Florida. And where people live contributes a lot to what they end up doing with their lives. So you had a lot of firsthand experience of hurricanes and rising sea levels, as well as in proximity to incredibly important environmental features like wetlands. So how did all of this affect your understanding of and your passion for working in the climate space?
The first job that I had while I was in graduate school in Florida was with the Department of Environmental Protection on a federal transportation grant. And my job was to take what was then a giant GPS that you wore on your back with a big tall antenna and to map the environmentally degraded lands owned by the state of Florida. And that meant that I saw, and you may know that it's 15 hours from Pensacola to Key West by car. So just to give you a sense of the vast nature and the differences of the ecosystems in a state that large, I got to traverse all corners of Florida and literally walk it, or swamp buggy or golf cart or whatever kind of vehicle, and oftentimes on foot, and map these areas for what's called a mitigation bank. And the long and short of it is I got to really see and understand the ecosystems of Florida. And I had a biologist with me from the Parks Department or from the Wildlife Conservation Commission or somebody with expertise to interpret what I was seeing. And it gave me a fantastic education about all that makes up Florida's natural world. And it was a great basis to understand what's at stake.
Amazing. So for visual context, I know people have probably seen the Google Maps car, driving around the United States with the giant camera sticking up out of the top. Was that you? Were you the early version?
But it was on my back and it was bright yellow. Yes. Yeah. Wow. It was before you could hold it in your hand. Yes, great accuracy. It did. It was, triangulating to satellites, and there's a photo somewhere, but it was quite an adventure. And you learn about how those properties got damaged. And a lot of times, the state of Florida and the economy is defined by development. And that means even how the state's revenue systems work, defined by development, and how those decisions are made. And at that point, of course, they were not climate informed in any way. not at all. And so that love for that, for conservation and understanding what's at stake, it was at the base of my environmental and climate career.
Amazing. So we're going to talk about a lot of different topics today, but I'd love to give the people listening a little bit of a baseline, because there are some terms that we haven't really talked about yet on the podcast. Resiliency, adaptation, and we've already talked a lot about mitigation, but is it possible to run through these terms just to give people a baseline?
You bet. So let's just talk about climate change right at the top. One of the things, it started out as global warming, and there was a move to take down the urgency of it by conservative voices in the US. I'm just going to talk about the US for now, and to call it something less scary. So we'll call it climate change versus global warming, which sounds more menacing. So we call it climate change, and that's a big word. I mean, it could mean anything, and it's this big blob of what's in there. I mean, is that about burning coal? Is that about sea level rise? Is that about climate justice? Is that about coal workers miners being out of work? And so we at the Adrienne Arsht-Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center, at our Resilience Center, want to be really specific about what we're talking about. So climate change is describing what's happening, but inside there are two key themes. You've named them: mitigation and adaptation. And mitigation means to stop doing something or to reduce the impacts of something. So if you want to mitigate the effects of climate change, stop emitting greenhouse gases that make the planet hotter. It's really simple. Stop doing it or store those gases. And there are different ways that we do that. One of the best ways is with nature. And so when you say mitigation, that's about the side that is about energy, about burning coal, about fracking. Where do the gases that warm the planet come from, and addressing them? So that's mitigation. And then adaptation is, we have already warmed our planet to 1 degree centigrade above where it should be, given our burning of fossil fuels and other sources. And that means for 30 years, no matter what we do, the temperature rise that we have now will stay with us. So if we keep going in what we say, BAU, business as usual, it will only get hotter. And that means hotter, bigger, droughts, heat waves, hurricanes, more sea level rise. 20% of the earth will be uninhabitable. A lot of bad things. So we have to do both. We have to mitigate, but adaptation in the face of what we have now, it's not something that we're experiencing or talking about in the future. It's happening right now. And so we have to adapt to that. We have to be practical. We have to be realistic and see what we have. And 2 weeks ago, the International Energy Agency put out their annual report on emissions and the future of energy sources. And they said 2020 will be likely the biggest emissions in a decade of greenhouse gases. So for all of our discussions about reducing emissions, we are nowhere. We are not getting it done. That's a reality. It's a harsh reality. We're not getting it done. And what that means is we have to invest in protecting people and economies and places from the impacts of climate change. And that is adaptation. And so then let's talk about resilience. So oftentimes you see climate adaptation and climate resilience being used synonymously. And in some cases that works, and in other cases it doesn't. And from our view, resilience is a personal trait. Resilience is something that our definition is, you are better equipped to prepare for, more capacity to prepare for, withstand, and recover from shocks and stresses. So think about all the climate impacts. Heat is a shock and a stress. Slowly it's getting hotter. Nighttime is hotter. That's when the body repairs itself. Sea level rise, slowly rising. Hurricanes are shocks. Heat waves are shocks. You get the picture. And so when we think about resilience, there's a spirit of resilience, and there is a mental positioning of like, we'll get through this, we'll get through this. And you're resilient, but you have tactical things that you do to adapt. You put your house on stilts, you move back, you use sandbags, you put a green roof on top of your house, you paint things lighter surfaces so that they reflect heat instead of absorb it. And so it seems like a fine distinction, but when you think about resilience and adaptation, that's the way we see the difference and the similarities. They go together. That's a really nice Venn diagram there.
That's incredibly interesting. And one of the things that we've talked a lot about on the podcast is the role of individuals. And I think having this concept of resiliency as something that's an individual outlook and an individual, way of thinking about the climate crisis is really important. However, we also think, there's the example of carbon footprint. And carbon footprint was a term that unfortunately was popularized by BP as a marketing term in order to put the onus on the individual to make changes in the climate space.
Incredibly powerful and strategic and perverted.
Absolutely. So this resiliency almost seems like the countermeasure to carbon footprint, because it allows people to build themselves back as opposed to saying, oh, this is my fault. I'm doing these things wrong, when really it's the policy side and the business side that needs to be addressing these from the small actions. Yes, in the aggregate end up making change, but that's a really interesting way of looking at resiliency. I really love that. Thank you for sharing that.
You bet. And one aspect of it too, we avoid very much the idea of resilience as just like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. That's not what we're talking about. I mean, big systems, big companies, government decisions way beyond the individual's level in developed economies have made these decisions that put people in developing economies in positions they had nothing to do with. So the idea of bootstraps, not talking about that. This is not their fault. This is not their responsibility. However, they still face what they face. They still have to, get up every day and try to find food and clean drinkable water and all that sort of stuff. And so the mental health aspects, the self or community level pieces are a really strong component of resilience in our view.
So we're talking a little bit about the difference between individuals and then larger scale changes. So a lot of the resiliency projects that you have proposed are local, but then they also have larger reaching effects. First, can you tell us about a few of the projects that you're working on, and how important is it to build communities and support systems at that local level, in addition to the help that may come from governments or larger organizations?
Well, I think the pandemic has shown us this, and we knew it beforehand, but it's been really reinforced. And that is that we will not be successful in adapting without building community and social cohesion. So those projects that are on the ground in communities are the most important thing that we can do. Yes, we need to replicate them, and we need to have the scale so that more people more quickly have access to things that make them more resilient and prepared for what's coming. But the idea that a community comes together is the basis for success. And you'll see this when there are lots of discussions about deploying capital and mobilizing investment into climate smart agriculture and into reforestation. And those words are, they're meaningful. However, they have to land somewhere. And the projects that mean we're sequestering more carbon in trees, or we are investing in things that make a community protected from storms or from heat or whatever it is, it's the community that does the work. It's the local economy that absorbs that financing and makes those things happen. And you cannot do that without, and this is a bit of a wonky phrase, but it's true, a multi-stakeholder process. And that's one of the biggest and maybe harshest realities of mobilizing the kind of capital we need to be in the world we need to live in. to get near achieving our SDGs. And that means communities have to come together and they have to be involved in those solutions. So a couple of examples. One of them is, it's so simple, but it's so effective, and that is kitchen garden kits. So in Chennai, we're partnered with Resilient Chennai and a group called Care Earth Trust, and we are distributing kitchen garden kits. And lots of people don't have gardens. They don't have access to land. Land ownership is an issue, all over. And so there's also a shortage of fresh fruits and vegetables in the nutrition of people, especially kids. When COVID came, the schools closed, and the midday meal that the kids get as a part of their program was not available because they're not in school. And so kids were hungry. And so we pivoted quickly from a rooftop garden to a kitchen garden kit. And it's something you can take with you. It's something that doesn't take up much space. And it produces fruits and vegetables and lettuces and herbs in 3 weeks or less. And it's super effective. And it comes with technical assistance. Someone comes by to train you on how to take care of your garden kit. And we have found that to be really helpful. And that's improving the nutrition of kids. And you can put those all together on the top of an apartment building and cool the building and grow your plants at the same time. So lots of multi-benefit solutions. So that's one. But let me take a break and see if you wanted to ask another question.
What's in this kit and how do I get one of these?
They're everywhere. I mean, there's seeds and a little bit of fertilizer, soil, and sometimes they're not even a pot. It's an actual sack. It's a great story. It's simple, but that's where we are right now. We need food. The food security impacts of COVID-19 are immense. And this is one of the clearest, easiest solutions.
Amazing. I love this. Okay, another example. These are so exciting.
Another example is a converted shipping container. And shipping containers are being converted and used for things all over the world. We converted a shipping container with our partner from the Mediterranean Shipping Company Foundation. They donated a shipping container, and we call it a resilience pod. And the pod is filled with location-specific risk info for a community, and it shares information about how to reduce your own personal risks. How can you be personally more resilient to what you're facing? Sea level rise or heat. It makes you aware of the slow onset illness that heat can bring without people's awareness. Heat is called the silent killer because it creeps up on you and it kills more Americans than any other climate-driven hazard.
Wow.
Yes, and it is just that people are just not aware. And so this pod is wrapped in the art of a local artist from Miami. So it's arts and culture of the community. Inside it reflects climate champions and resilience champions from the Miami-Dade community working in all different parts of the community. And it provides free trees, and they're fruit trees. So again, food security, mangoes. I think the most popular tree that we gave away was a mango tree, and how to plant it, and the website, to go to figure out if you're having trouble with your mango tree. And so that's another really local solution. And shipping containers can go anywhere and be anything. And so that's another local solution that we are working on.
Amazing. So shipping containers, I first saw repurposed shipping containers when I was on tour in Austin. And I don't know if you've been to Austin, but they build full buildings and there are bars and restaurants completely made out of shipping containers. And I never thought about using that for something like this. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is this is a perfect example of what you were talking about before, the multi-stakeholder approach, because when I think about multi-stakeholders, and this is a lot of what I do in my academic work, bringing together indigenous communities and local NGOs and states and lawyers to kind of work on large-scale human rights and development projects. But you brought in artists, which is a whole nother piece of the community that you never really think about when talking about climate change. What is that like? Is the art that's wrapped around these containers, is it focused on climate, or is it just to highlight these artists, and what is their involvement?
The artists used the heat stripes the map of time over time that goes from blue to orange as the baseline. So that blue to orange is the backdrop of his art, and it has a message in it, of course, about climate, but it also has beautiful colors that reflect Miami and the culture there. And back to social cohesion, the vision for these pods is that you'd have one in every community, and it's a place where people gather to get information or give information or charge their phones. It's tricked out with solar, and it can be a cooling station. And so you want to make it a physical place for, for lack of a better term, resilience services. Where do you go to figure out what's going on in your community just for you and your neighbors?
That's amazing. So there's one example that you haven't mentioned yet that seems to me like the easiest thing in the world. And I'm curious if it really does have an effect. And it's painting rooftops white.
Oh, yeah.
This seems so easy, right?
Super impactful. Yes. Yes. Or if the roof is, structurally sound, putting green on top of your roof. That's another really, really easy way. But painting it white, yes, that reflects instead of absorbs. And one of the most interesting things, it's called the diurnal range, the difference between the temperature in the day and the temperature in the night. And it's that range is getting smaller and smaller and smaller because of the urban heat island effect, and because it's just hotter, and all of the buildings and the surfaces and everything else are radiating heat at night. And so that's, if you don't have air conditioning, that's when the body repairs, and people can't, your brain gets cleaned out when you sleep. And if you're not sleeping well, kids don't learn well. I mean, there's all sorts of health impacts that come with it. But yes, that's a pretty easy solution. And then just to talk about trees. Trees are an amazing solution for climate change. They're like the superhero of climate change. There's a fantastic program by an organization called American Forests, and they call this tree equity. And if you look at a community, where are people of color, where are people in low income neighborhoods, they have so few trees compared to the wealthy neighborhoods. And this has been mapped. And now American Forest, who's a partner of ours in the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance, they are giving cities tree equity scores. And there can be a temperature difference of 13 to 17 degrees in one city from one neighborhood to another because of concrete and black asphalt and no trees. And, when you call them a leafy suburb, we call them that for a reason, because they're wealthy and well canopied and cool. And trees lower your utility bill, they clean the water, they store carbon, they cool the air. I mean, they're just superheroes.
This is such an incredibly important point, because I think when people think about trees, you think about the Amazon, or you think about forests. And yes, of course, there are major problems going on in the Amazon, and we are destroying a lung of the earth right now. But also to think about trees in urban environments and what it can do for bringing temperatures down. That's incredible.
They also lower the admission rate to emergency rooms for asthma.
Oh, wow.
Because they're cleaning the air of pollution. And so they really are. There's just endless benefits.
That's amazing, because we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals on here a lot, and we talk about how they're all interconnected and interrelated. And the fact that the goal about good health and well-being can be connected to, forests and climate change, that's incredible. And just as a reminder for everyone who's listening, if you do subscribe to this podcast, we plant a tree. So it's really easy. We plant a tree with one click.
So great. That's so great. What kind of tree do you plant?
We plant indigenous trees to specific areas. So we work with an amazing organization called Trees for the Future, which takes the forest garden approach. So it goes in and it educates local communities about how to take care of the trees that are being planted. They can use the fruits that are born from the trees as in this farming approach, and they can, consume them or sell them. And it's really important, like you were saying before, to engage local communities and all of the stakeholders. I mean, I've seen these drone approaches to trees where they just send out a whole bunch of seeds and maybe they'll grow to maturity, maybe they won't. That's not doing what we need it to do. So yeah, we did a lot of research to make sure we're finding the right approach to tree planting.
That's just great. That is really wonderful.
Absolutely. I want to wrap up here today with one more question for you, and I want to read a quote. That's a quote from you, from Foreign Affairs, and it says, "Many adaptations do not require new technology, nor do they have to pass through the political minefield of international climate action." So you're saying the technology is already here. The technology exists and it's accessible. It doesn't require international politics. So what really is getting in the way of large-scale resiliency?
It's a complicated answer and a complicated question, but I think to be as simple as possible, big scale things like projects, and often you'll hear people say in several around the time that President Biden had his climate summit, those that talk about climate finance talk about how much money is sloshing around out there. This is not a capital problem. It's not a money problem. This is a project problem. And so we need to mobilize stakeholders at the local level to prepare themselves to receive big chunks of money to make these local adaptation interventions possible. And that means make the stakeholder environment prepared for and enabling for money to come in. And that means a lot of things, but paint the whole town's roof white. Yeah. Tree the entire community. If you need to move people back, you need a buyout program, put a price on it and get ready to move the money. Because what oftentimes in impact investing, you talk about the last mile, but it needs to be the first mile. The first mile is get the stakeholders engaged and ready to govern their own adaptation and to receive the money it takes. And that's it.
Amazing. So one of my favorite things about the conversation that we've had today is that you're not afraid of complexity. And so much in this climate space is either so complex that no one who doesn't have, a doctorate in this is able to understand it, or so simple that it doesn't, fully dive into the fact that these are complex and interrelated ideas. And so I want to thank you so much for being here and sharing, these complex ideas in ways that are easy to grasp and for people to understand and actually take action on. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much, Adam. I enjoyed it. It's my favorite topic. Thank you.
Amazing.